The morning Preston Hale drove his black Lincoln Continental up the Caliche Road to Mabel Truett's ranch. He had one hand on the steering wheel and the other on a stack of orange survey flags. That was the first mistake. A man who brings survey flags to land he does not own is already telling you too much. He stepped out in a cream linen suit that looked expensive from a distance and foolish up close, because late September in western Nebraska still had enough heat left in it to punish a man for pretending he lived somewhere else. His county zoning badge flashed on his belt. 2 sheriff's deputies got out behind him. A clerk from the planning office balanced a metal clipboard against her hip, and Preston walked toward the old west pasture fence like he had personally invented property lines. Mabel Truett stood beside the cattle guard with a tin coffee cup in her hand. She was 72 years old, 5'3", and wearing a sun-faded denim shirt with one pearl snap missing at the collar. Her gray hair was pinned under a straw hat. Her boots were older than Preston's career. She watched him cross the yard with the quiet patience of a woman who had outwaited hail, drought, pneumonia, bankers, coyotes, and 3 generations of men who mistook silence for surrender. Held up a citation. "Mrs. Truett, your west boundary fence violates Dawes County Livestock Containment Code 19C. Unsupported corner brace, insufficient wire tension, and dangerous lean toward a county right-of-way." Mabel looked past him at the fence. It was old. Nobody sensible would deny that. The posts were cedar. The wire had been patched more times than a church roof, and the southwest corner leaned just enough to look like it was considering a nap. But it had held cattle since Eisenhower was president. Preston tapped the paper. $750 fine. 30 days to bring the fence into full compliance. If you fail, my office can condemn every livestock barrier on this property. Behind him, an old blue heeler with 3 legs came trotting out from under the shade of the machine shed. His name was Rook. Rook had lost the leg to a hay mower years earlier, and had spent every day since then behaving as if the missing leg had been everyone else's problem. He walked straight to Preston's stack of orange survey flags, took one in his teeth, carried it across the yard, and planted it upright in a fresh cow pie. The deputies stared at it. The clerk stopped writing. Preston looked at the flag, then at the dog, then at Mabel. Mabel took a slow sip of coffee. Rook's particular about where things belong. What Preston Hale did not know, and could not know, was that in 30 days, every fence he had sighted would be gone, and 187 black cattle would know exactly which road to take. Mabel Truett was not a woman people in Box Elder County described quickly. They usually started with the ranch, because the ranch was easier to explain. 620 acres of short grass, windbreak, creek bottom, hay ground, and 2 long ridges that turned purple at sunset. Her husband's grandfather had filed the first claim in 1911, when the country was still rough enough that a man could measure optimism in blisters. The Truett place survived the grasshopper years, the dust years, the mortgage year, the freeze that killed half the calf crop, and the spring flood that took the original bridge clean off its pilings and left it lodged in a cottonwood tree half a mile downstream. Mabel had come to the ranch at 19 as Mabel Finch, married Wade Truett at 20, and buried him at 64 under a sandstone marker east of the windmill. After Wade died, people expected her to sell. They said it kindly at first, Then they said it practically. Mabel had a way of letting a sentence die in front of her without giving it a proper funeral. She ran 187 head of Black Angus, 40 acres of alfalfa, and a little hay lease on the north side that only made money in years when God felt cooperative. She kept ledgers in pencil. She sharpened fence staples with a file when she had to. She kept Wade's old canvas chore coat hanging by the back door, not because she wore it often, but because there are some absences you do not tidy away. Every morning before sunrise, she made coffee in a dented percolator, checked the pressure in the stock tank line, fed Rook half a biscuit, and drove the fence in a brown 1968 Ford pickup that started better in cold weather than warm, mostly out of spite. Rook rode in the passenger seat like a foreman. The west fence was the one Preston Hale had suddenly decided to care about. 4 strands of barbed wire, cedar posts, 2 gate openings, 1 low stretch near the borrow ditch where snowmelt collected in April. Wade's father had reset the line in 1953 after the county widened the old mail road by 16 feet. The county had signed off on the reset. The file had been stamped, archived, forgotten, and left to become exactly the kind of old paper that dangerous men assume nobody remembers. Preston Hale was dangerous in the polished way. He was 46, clean-shaven, and shaped by the belief that every room improved when he entered it with documents. He had served 9 years as county zoning director after 2 failed campaigns for county commissioner and 1 short career selling irrigation equipment he did not understand. He owned 6 suits, all too smooth for the places he wore them. His hair was parted so sharply it looked engineered. He wore a square gold watch and tapped it whenever he wanted someone to feel late. He liked rules, because rules let him sound moral while getting what he wanted. And what he wanted was the west meadow on Mabel Truett's ranch. Not the whole ranch. Not yet. Just a strip wide enough for a private service road and a grain-loading spur the Prairie Meridian Cooperative wanted to build between the highway and a proposed feed facility near the rail line. The west meadow sat exactly where their engineer wanted that access. It was the cleanest route, the cheapest route, the route that did not require buying out 3 smaller landowners or negotiating with the state highway department. There was only one problem. Mabel Truett would not sell. Preston had approached her once at the courthouse after a tax hearing and said the co-op's plan would be good for the county. Mabel had said, "Maybe." He said it would bring jobs. She said, "Maybe." He said progress required cooperation. She said, "So does branding calves, but I still prefer to know who's holding the rope." That had been the end of that conversation. 3 months later, the zoning office discovered a sudden and passionate interest in agricultural fencing. The first citation came on a Monday. Preston delivered it personally because he enjoyed the ceremonial parts of pressure. He read the violations out loud, pointed at the corner brace as if he were unveiling a crime scene, and explained that his office had the authority to inspect any livestock containment structure adjacent to a county right-of-way. Mabel listened. Rook watched Preston's shoes. When Preston finished, Mabel folded the citation once and tucked it into the pocket of her denim shirt. "Anything else?" she asked. Preston had prepared for anger. He had prepared for pleading. He had prepared for the kind of nervous chatter people make when power enters their yard and starts naming prices. He had not prepared for anything else. "No," he said. "Then mind the cattle guard on your way out. It rattles if you hit it too fast." Preston smiled like a man forgiving ignorance. "I'm trying to help you avoid a larger problem, Mrs. Truett." Mabel looked at the orange survey flag standing in the cow pie. "Seems you brought one with you." He left with both deputies and one missing flag. The next week, Preston escalated. A deputy named Albright drove out with a supplemental notice. He was young enough to look uncomfortable when his uniform asked him to do foolish things. He handed Mabel the envelope and said, "Ma'am, I was told to make sure you got this." Mabel opened it at the kitchen table, while Rook leaned his chin against her boot. The notice added 5 more violations. North Lane Gate, improper hinge clearance. East Pasture cross fence, wire spacing irregularity. South holding pen, unauthorized brace repair. Main cattle guard, insufficient warning reflector. West fence, continued hazard. The fine was now $2,100. Mabel read the page twice. Then she put on Wade's chore coat, drove the brown Ford into town, and parked behind the courthouse where the basement door stuck in wet weather. The records room smelled like dust, carbon paper, floor wax, and old arguments. There sat Fay Lenhart, who had been deputy clerk for 28 years and could locate a forgotten drainage easement faster than most people could find their reading glasses. "Mabel," Fay said, looking over the top of her bifocals, "you after tax maps or trouble?" "Paper," Mabel said. "That is usually trouble after enough time." Mabel asked for 3 files. The 1953 County Road widening plat, the 1961 stock drift and water lane agreement between the Truett place and the Barrow Ranch to the west, and the original zoning correspondence around the West Meadow after the Livestock Code was revised in 1974. Fay looked at her for a moment. Then she reached for her keys. Some women do not need a full explanation to know which cabinet matters. By noon, Mabel had copies folded into a yellow envelope and a cup of courthouse coffee bad enough to make her grateful she had survived worse. She thanked Fay, walked upstairs, and passed Preston Hale in the hallway. He glanced at the envelope. "Doing your homework?" he asked. Mabel did not stop walking. Somebody ought to. That afternoon, she sat at her kitchen table with the papers spread under the light. The 1953 plat showed the west fence reset by county order and accepted as a permanent agricultural boundary after the county took the road strip. The margin note was narrow, typed in uneven letters, but it was there. Existing livestock fence to remain as legal non-conforming boundary unless documented containment failure occurs. Legal non-conforming. That meant old, yes. Ugly, maybe. Illegal, no. The second file was better. 1961, after a blizzard trapped cattle along the West Ridge, the Truett and Barrow families had recorded a shared stock drift, an emergency water lane along the same West Meadow Preston wanted for the Co-op Road. It allowed cattle from either ranch to move across the low ground to water during drought, snow closure, or containment failure. It could not be blocked, paved, fenced off, or converted without signatures from both landowners and review by the State Livestock Board. Mabel read that line 3 times. Rook sneezed under the table. "I know," she said. The third file was the sharpest. The Livestock Code changed in 1974. The county attorney at the time had issued guidance, stating that removal of a sited structure was an approved alternative to repair, provided the owner notified the county and did not conceal livestock risk. If removal created a temporary livestock emergency on a county road, the county zoning office had to request temporary state assistance and document the cause of removal. In other words, Preston had handed her a law with a door in it. He was so busy pushing that he had not noticed the hinge. Mabel put the copies back in the envelope and called the Barrow Ranch. Ned Barrow answered on the fourth ring, sounding like he had been born suspicious and had practiced daily. "Ned," Mabel said, "you still mad about that culvert Preston made you pay for?" There was a pause. "Depends who's asking." "I am." "Then yes." 2 days later, Preston arrived with a larger audience. This time he brought the clerk, both deputies, a county road supervisor, and a man from the zoning board who kept wiping his glasses with a handkerchief, even though there was nothing on them. Preston wore a pale gray suit, and boots so clean the pasture seemed personally offended. He announced a full compliance inspection. Mabel offered coffee. Preston declined. The inspection took nearly 3 hours. They photographed braces, measured post height, tugged wire, inspected gates, and wrote on forms as if forms could make a thing true by being numerous enough. Rook followed the group at a polite distance until Preston knelt to photograph the west brace. Then the dog picked up Preston's measuring tape, carried it under the bottom wire, and dropped it neatly into the water trough. One deputy coughed into his fist. Mabel said nothing. Preston retrieved the tape with 2 fingers, and the dignity of a man losing a war he did not yet know had started. 4 days later, the final notice arrived by certified mail. Every exterior fence on the Truett Ranch was now sighted. All boundary lines, both cattle guards, main holding pen, west meadow gate, north drift lane, east cross fence. Total fines, $6,800. Attached was a typed note on county letterhead. Failure to remediate within 10 days may result in condemnation of all non-compliant livestock containment structures and county action to prevent public hazard. Preston signed it in blue ink. Mabel studied the signature for a long moment. Then she made 3 phone calls. The first was to Ned Barrow, who said he would pull his father's copy of the 1961 Drift Lane papers and be at her place whenever she said. The second was to a retired brand inspector named Hollis Crane, who had once told Wade Truett that most county men understood cattle about as well as cattle understood county men. The third was to the State Livestock Board office in Lincoln. That call lasted 18 minutes. Mabel did not raise her voice. She did not dramatize. She gave dates, document names, code sections, cattle count, fence locations, and Preston's exact phrase about condemnation. The woman on the other end asked her to repeat one thing. "Did you say he cited the North Drift Lane?" "Yes." "Is that the recorded Truett Barrow emergency lane?" "Yes." There was a small silence. Then the woman said, "Mrs. Truett, please do not lose those papers." "I wasn't planning to." On day 29, Preston Hale came for the signature. He arrived at 6:40 in the morning, early enough to imply urgency, and late enough that Mabel had already finished the first round of chores. His Lincoln rolled through the ranch entrance with the same smooth confidence it had on the first morning. Behind it came a county pickup and a white truck with Prairie Meridian Cooperative printed on the door. That was the second mistake. A man trying to pretend this is about safety should not bring the buyer to the farm. Preston stepped out in a navy suit, carrying a leather folder. The co-op representative stayed near the white truck, with both hands in his pockets, and the uneasy expression of someone realizing a handshake deal may have included weather he had not prepared for. Mabel stood by the west gate. Rook sat beside her, one ear up, one ear folded, looking like a small judge with fur. "Mrs. Truett," Preston said, "we can end this today." "Can we?" "Yes." He opened the folder and removed a document. "Prairie Meridian is prepared to fund full replacement of your remaining fences, waive all accumulated penalties through the county, and assume future maintenance of the west access lane." Mabel looked at the paper but did not touch it. "What lane?" Preston smiled. "The proposed service lane. It would cross the west meadow. Narrow footprint. Minimal disruption." "Sounds like a road." "Technically an access easement." "Sounds like a road that learned a longer word." One deputy turned his head away. Preston's smile thinned. "If you decline, the enforcement clock expires tomorrow morning. My office will condemn the cited structures. Once your cattle are uncontained, the county will be forced to act. You know what impound fees are on 187 head?" Mabel looked at him. "No." "They are not small." "No," she said. "I expect not." He held the document out. "Sign the easement. Keep your ranch. Keep your ranch. Let the county move forward." That was how he said it. Let the county move forward. As if the county were a horse and Mabel were the gate. She looked toward the west meadow, where the grass had gone silver at the tips, and the old fence leaned in the first light. Wade had fixed that corner the spring before he died. He had stood there with a staple pouch on his belt, one hand against the post, squinting toward the road like he could see a future problem coming, and did not care for its shape. Mabel could almost hear him. "Do it clean, Mab. Don't do it loud unless clean quits working." She took a breath. "I'll need the night," she said. Preston nodded, satisfied. 7 tomorrow morning. "All right." He turned to leave, then looked down at Rook. The dog had one of Preston's orange flags between his teeth. No one had seen him take it. Rook walked calmly to the cattle guard, dropped the flag between the metal rails, and let it fall into the dust below. Mabel watched Preston watch the flag. "He's particular," she said again. Preston did not answer. That night, Mabel did not sleep much. She was not afraid. Fear is fast. This was slower than fear. She sat at the kitchen table with the yellow envelope open beside Wade's ledgers. The house was quiet, except for the refrigerator clicking on and the wind moving along the north windows. Rook slept near the stove, with his paws twitching. On the wall above the telephone hung a framed photograph of Wade at 25, holding a newborn calf in both arms and laughing like the world had not yet learned how to take things from him. Mabel read the documents one more time. The 1953 legal non-conforming fence notation. The 1961 stock drift and emergency water lane. The 1974 removal alternative. Then she added the new piece. Hollis Crane had called back just after supper. He had not found only livestock rules. He had found a state disclosure filing. Preston Hale's annual county ethics form listed no outside consulting income. But Prairie Meridian Cooperative had paid a company called North Platte Land Services $8,000 for site coordination, 3 months earlier. North Platte Land Services had one registered agent, Preston's brother-in-law. That was not proof by itself, but it was enough to make a quiet person on the state end of a telephone become very interested. At 8:12 that night, Mabel called Lincoln again. This time she spoke with a field investigator from the state attorney general's office and a livestock board enforcement officer on the same line. She gave them the documents. She gave them the names. She gave them the time Preston had set. The investigator asked, "Mrs. Truett, what do you intend to do in the morning?" Mabel looked at the 1974 guidance. "Remove the cited structures." There was a pause. "All of them?" "He cited all of them." Another pause. Then the livestock officer said, very carefully, "Make sure you do not block the road." "I won't." "And make sure someone photographs the wire removal." "They will." "And Mrs. Truett?" "Yes. Do not let anyone take your original papers." Mabel looked at Wade's photograph. "No," she said. "I learned that one young." She hung up, put the papers back in the envelope, and walked out to the barn. Rook followed, limping with purpose. The cattle shifted in the dark, black shapes against darker ground. The Old West gate creaked once in the wind. Mabel stood with her hand on the top rail and listened. A ranch at night tells you the truth about itself. Wire hums, cattle breathe, wind sorts through dry grass. Old buildings settle into their own weight. Everything that matters is either holding or it is not. Mabel rested her palm against the gate Wade had rehung 15 years earlier. "Tomorrow," she said. Rook leaned against her boot. At 4:15 in the morning, Mabel made coffee. At 4:30, she fed Rook. At 4:45, she drove to the West Brace with fence pliers, a roll of twine, a staple puller, 2 thermoses, and the yellow envelope tucked under the truck seat. Ned Barrow arrived at 5:10 with his 2 sons and his father's copy of the Drift Lane Agreement in a cigar box. Hollis Crane arrived at 5:20, wearing a wool vest, carrying a camera, and looking happier than a retired man had any right to look before sunrise. Fay Lenhart from the records room arrived at 5:35. Mabel looked at her. Fay lifted a paper sack. "I brought cinnamon rolls." "That official business?" "County morale." By 5:45, they were working. They did not tear anything down wildly. Mabel would not have allowed it. They unclipped wire, pulled staples, loosened braces, coiled strands at the posts, unpinned gates and leaned them flat against the grass. Every piece was stacked neatly beside the line it came from. Every post remained standing. Every wire that had been sighted was no longer functioning as a containment structure. By 6:40, the west fence was open. By 6:50, the north drift lane was open. By 6:58, every fence named in Preston Hale's citations had been removed from service. The cattle noticed. Cattle are not dramatic animals unless people make them that way. They do not pour through an opening like flood water, because a story needs excitement. They lift their heads. They consider. They decide the world has become larger. Then they walk. The first 20 cows moved through the west opening at a calm, grazing pace. Then another 30 followed. Then the rest of the herd began drifting toward the low ground, the way they had been bred and trained and weather-taught to do. Not into town. Not through anyone's garden. Not into traffic like Preston had imagined. They walked onto the recorded stock drift lane, then angled toward the Barrow water gap, as if the old agreement were written not only in the courthouse basement, but somewhere deeper. In hooves and habit, and the memory of drought. Mabel stood beside the cattle guard with her coffee. Rook sat in the dust at her feet. At exactly 7 a.m., the black Lincoln appeared at the bend. Preston Hale slowed when he saw the first cows, then he stopped completely. The Lincoln idled 30 yards from the ranch entrance, while 187 Black Angus cattle moved across the low road in front of him, with the slow authority of living law. Preston got out. His face had not decided which emotion to use. "What is this?" he said. Mabel lifted her cup. "Morning." "What did you do?" "Removed the cited structures." "You what?" "Removed them. Your notice said repair or removal. Repair was too expensive. Fines were worse. So I chose removal." Preston stared past her at the open fence lines. "You can't just turn cattle loose." "They're not loose. They're using the recorded drift and water lane." He blinked. "The what?" Mabel reached into the truck and removed a copy from the yellow envelope. Truett Barrow Emergency Stock Lane. Recorded in 1961. Still active. You cited the north section last week. Preston's jaw worked once. Behind him, vehicles began pulling off the county road. Ned Barrow's boys had apparently made one phone call each. Fay may have made several. By 7:08, there were pickups lined along the Barrow ditch, a feed truck, the Methodist pastor's station wagon, 2 women from the courthouse, and the owner of the hardware store standing with both hands hooked in his suspenders, like he had bought a ticket, and lowered his voice. "Mrs. Truett, get those cattle contained immediately." "Can't." "You are creating a public hazard." "No," she said. "Your office created a livestock emergency by citing and condemning the only containment structures on the property. I selected the remedy your notice allowed. Under state livestock emergency procedure, the county has to request temporary containment support and document the initiating action." She turned the page. "That would be you." The deputies looked at Preston. The co-op representative, who had arrived behind the Lincoln, stopped halfway out of his truck and got back in. Preston's gold watch flashed as he pointed toward the pasture. "Obstruction." Mabel shook her head. "No, obstruction is blocking a recorded stock lane. That's why Prairie Meridian can't put a service road through the West Meadow without Ned Barrow's signature and Livestock Board review." Ned Barrow leaned against his pickup and lifted one hand. "Which they don't have," he said. People along the road heard that. A murmur moved through them. Preston's face changed. Not much, just enough. The kind of change a man makes when he realizes the floor he has been standing on was not floor. It was a trapdoor painted the right color. At 7:22, a state sedan came over the ridge. At 7:23, a second one followed. The first carried a livestock board enforcement officer named Carla Vance, who stepped out in field boots with a binder under one arm and a look that suggested she preferred facts to ceremony. The second carried a state attorney general's investigator named Daniel Rowe. Preston watched them approach. For the first time since Mabel had known him, he did not check his watch. Carla introduced herself to Mabel first. Then she turned to Preston. "Mr. Hale, We received documentation that your office initiated a full ranch livestock containment action against a property with a recorded emergency stock lane, an illegal non-conforming county-approved boundary. Preston smiled. It was a professional smile, a hallway smile, a smile built for meetings where nobody had brought cattle. Officer Vance, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. This is a local compliance matter. Daniel Rowe opened his folder. It became more than local when your office's enforcement action intersected with a proposed private access easement and an undisclosed site coordination payment routed through North Platte Land Services. The crowd went very still. Preston said nothing. Rook stood. He walked to the cattle guard, stuck his nose between the bars, and came back dragging the orange survey flag he had dropped there the day before. Dust clung to it. One corner was bent. He carried it to Mabel and laid it at her feet. Fay Lenhart whispered, "Good dog." Carla Vance looked at the flag. Then she looked at the stack of identical flags in the back seat of Preston's Lincoln. "Are those county markers?" she asked. Preston cleared his throat. "They're general planning materials." Daniel Rowe turned a page. Prairie Meridian's preliminary survey uses orange access markers at 50-foot intervals. Your brother-in-law's company billed $8,000 for site coordination. Your county disclosure lists no outside relationship connected to the project. Preston's expression hardened. "That is a family business matter. It has no relevance to fence compliance." Mabel looked at him then, really looked. Not with anger. Anger would have made it too easy for him. She looked at him with the calm attention of a rancher, examining a post that has rotted from the inside, while the outside still holds paint. "You brought their truck to my gate," she said. No one spoke. There are sentences that do not need volume because they land on evidence. The co-op representative started his engine. Daniel Rowe glanced at him. "I'll need you to remain available, sir." The engine shut off. Preston took one step toward Mabel. One deputy shifted immediately, not toward Mabel, but toward Preston. That small movement did more damage than a shout. Preston saw it. So did everyone else. Carla Vance said, "Mr. Hale, pending review, the state is assuming emergency oversight of this livestock situation. Your office is not to issue further directives on this property today. My office has jurisdiction. Not over a state-recognized stock lane during an emergency your office appears to have triggered." Daniel Rowe closed his folder, "and will need you to come with us to answer questions regarding the disclosure issue." Preston looked at the road, at the cattle, at the open fences, at the crowd, at the orange flag lying beside Mabel's boot. Then he looked at Rook. The dog sat down and scratched behind his ear with his one back foot, unimpressed by the collapse of county authority. Preston's mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. He was not arrested in the dramatic way stories sometimes prefer. No one grabbed him. No one shouted. No one read something for the crowd. He was guided toward the state sedan with the careful politeness reserved for men whose power has just become paperwork. That was worse. The Lincoln remained beside the road, empty and shining, while one of Mabel's cows leaned over and licked the driver's side mirror with long, luxurious indifference. A laugh moved through the crowd before anyone could stop it. Mabel did not laugh, but she did lower her coffee cup and look away for a second. Rook barked once. It sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. The practical problem took the rest of the morning. Cattle do not care who wins jurisdictional arguments. They still need water, shade, and someone with enough sense to keep them from exploring the highway. Carla Vance called in temporary panels from the state yard. Ned Barrow opened the water gap on his side. Hollis Crane photographed everything twice. Mabel and the Barrow boys moved the herd into the emergency lane and held them there until the panels arrived. By noon, the cattle were contained. By 3, the west lane was secured. By dusk, Mabel had the first stretch of wire back up. She did not rebuild all the fences immediately. She rebuilt what mattered first. That is how ranch people survive. Not everything at once. The necessary thing, then the next necessary thing. The investigation took 5 months. It did not have the simple shape town gossip gave it, because official misconduct never does. Because official misconduct never does. It came out in memos, checks, filings, meeting notes, mileage logs, draft plats, and one letter from Prairie Meridian's engineering consultant that used the phrase, cooperative county pathway, with a kind of innocence only an expensive consultant can manage. Preston Hale resigned on a Thursday afternoon. His resignation letter said he was stepping down to prevent distraction from important county business. Nobody believed that, but several people admired the sentence for trying so hard. The state report found that Preston had used livestock containment enforcement to pressure Mabel Truett into signing a private access easement that would have benefited a development project tied to his family. It found that he failed to disclose the relationship. It found that his office ignored existing county records, including the 1953 legal nonconforming boundary and the 1961 emergency stock lane. The fines against Mabel were voided. The citations were withdrawn. Prairie Meridian canceled the West Meadow route and later built a smaller facility closer to the highway, where the road was less convenient, but the landowner had actually agreed to sell. Ned Barrow's stock lane was formally re-indexed in the county records system, which made Fay Lenhart so pleased she baked a pie and refused to call it celebratory. A new zoning director took office the following spring and made the mistake of telling Mabel that the county wanted to rebuild trust with agricultural producers. Mabel said, "Good." Then she handed him a list of culverts his office had misclassified over the previous 6 years. The west fence went back up over 2 cold days in October. Mabel used new wire, old posts, and the same gate. Ned helped. His sons helped. Hollis watched from the truck and said annoying things about staple angle, until Mabel threatened to put him in charge of lunch, which settled him down. Rook supervised from the shade of the Ford. Every few hours he limped over to the cattle guard and checked the bars, as if making sure no more orange flags had tried to sneak back onto the ranch. When the last strand was tightened, Mabel stood at the southwest corner and put one gloved hand on the brace. The post still leaned a little. Not enough to fail, just enough to remind you that straight and strong are not always the same thing. That winter was hard, the kind of hard that scrapes romance off rural life. Water froze twice. Hay prices climbed. Mabel lost 3 calves in one storm, and saved a 4th by bringing it into the mudroom and warming it with towels that had once been reserved for guests. Life went on, which is what life does after a story ends for everyone else. The west fence held. It held through the thaw, through spring mud, through a June wind that folded the hardware store sign in half, and through the next 11 years of cattle leaning, rubbing, testing, and ignoring the legal significance of anything. It never lost a cow. Preston Hale moved to Grand Island and sold insurance for a while. People said he did not like to discuss county government. Prairie Meridian changed managers. The Lincoln disappeared from town. The orange survey flags became a private joke among people who had been there. And for a few months somebody kept planting them in suspicious places. The courthouse flower bed, the co-op mailbox, the men's room at the sale barn. Mabel did not participate. Not officially. Fay Lenhart claimed she once saw Rook carrying one down Main Street, but Fay also understood the value of a story improving slightly in the telling. 2 years later, a young reporter from a regional paper came out to interview Mabel after the state cited the case in a training seminar on agricultural enforcement. He asked her if she had known all along that Preston would be caught. Mabel was mending a section of harness on the porch. Rook, older now and gray around the muzzle, slept at her feet. "No," she said. The reporter looked disappointed. "You didn't know?" "I knew the fence wasn't illegal. I knew the lane was recorded. I knew he wanted something he didn't want to name. That's not the same as knowing." "What made you take all the fences down?" Mabel pulled the thread tight. "He told me every one of them was a problem." The reporter waited for more. Mabel gave him none, so he tried again. "Do you think justice worked?" Mabel looked toward the west pasture. He asked her if she had known all along that Preston would be caught. Mabel was mending a section of harness on the porch. Rook, older now and gray around the muzzle, slept at her feet. "No," she said. The reporter looked disappointed. "You didn't know?" "I knew the fence wasn't illegal. I knew the lane was recorded. I knew he wanted something he didn't want to name. That's not the same as knowing." "What made you take all the fences down?" Mabel pulled the thread tight. "He told me every one of them was a problem." The reporter waited for more. Mabel gave him none, so he tried again. "Do you think justice worked?" Mabel looked toward the west pasture. This line ran in a long, uneven thread across the grass. Not pretty, not new, not impressive to anyone who measured worth by shine. But it stood where it was supposed to stand. It held what it was supposed to hold. And when a man came with papers saying it did not belong there, the truth had been waiting in a courthouse basement, in an old stock lane, in a widow's patience, and in a three-legged dog who knew exactly where to put an orange flag. Mabel set the harness down. "Justice is like fence," she said. "It doesn't have to look straight from the road." She looked at Rook, then back at the west line. "It just has to hold."